What if the things that haunt us aren't monsters lurking in the shadows, but grief, guilt, and the hunger for vengeance? Today, we step into the gritty underbelly of 1970s Portland with author and artist Keith Rosson. His latest novel, Coffin Moon, doesn't just reimagine the vampire myth, it throws it headlong into a world shaped by trauma, addiction, and the desperate pull of family. This episode explores how Keith fuses punk energy, literary grit, and existential dread to create stories that exist in the blurry borderland between ordinary life and the uncanny. If you enjoy the show, consider supporting it by subscribing to my Patreon for exclusive daily blog posts and weekly book and film reviews. You can also support the show for free by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you Keith Rosson. Keith, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 22nd day of August 2025. I came across your work on Bookstagram and was immediately interested when I read the synopsis, drawn in by its dark, gritty, noir subject matter. Then I hit the line, quote, "Then a vampire walks into his bar and ruins his life." It almost sounds like the start of a really interesting joke, but
yeah, right. Yeah.
That was the moment I knew I had to check it out. And what I found was a raw noir drama steeped in existential dread, but also a violent reimagining of the vampire trope. Some elements preserved, others altered or stripped away, all combined to put a fresh spin on a classic archetype. So thank you for bringing this book to life and for joining me on the show to discuss it.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. I'm stoked to dive into it.
Awesome. Well, so kind of a brief synopsis. The book is about a man named Dwayne Miner who comes back from Vietnam carrying scars that no one can see. He pours drinks, fights to stay sober, tries to salvage what's left of his marriage to his wife Heidi, and shoulders the responsibility of raising his 13-year-old niece, Julia. Life is brittle, but he's holding it together. Then a vampire walks into his bar. John Varley doesn't haunt castles. He buries himself in loose soil by day and sprouts teeth under the moon. And when Dwayne crosses him, the response is brutal. Heidi is murdered, Dwayne is drowned in guilt, Julia is set ablaze with rage, and what's left of their family fuses around a single obsession: revenge. And that is where the story begins. So, what drew you to 1975 Portland as the setting for a vampire novel, and what does that moment in time bring to the story?
You know, I think there's a couple things. One is I didn't want to do a chase novel set in current times just because it, like, the kind of accoutrements that we have now with, like, cell phones and cell signals and all that stuff is just, like, better writers than me can pull that off and make it interesting. But it didn't hold my interest enough, you know? And the other thing is, Dwayne Miner kind of lives in the shadow of his experiences in Vietnam. And to me, with my age, like, that war was like a lot of ways the defining moment of, like, men in my life who were my mentors, you know, and the adults in my life. And so, like a lot of people my age, like it was just kind of in media everywhere. You know what I mean? You think of Rambo, like that is essentially a story about Vietnam in a way, you know? And so it was just so prevalent in media in my formative years. And so to me, I honestly have a lot of interest in that war specifically. And it was the last one that had the draft. And yeah, so I mean, those two kind of things together really were the formative building blocks of like why I set in the 70s.
Yeah, and I'm not a writer, but I would imagine Supernatural gets kind of hard to pull off when it's present day and we've got the surveillance state. You know,
Yeah,
every
absolutely. Right.
everybody's got a camera in their pocket. There's cameras mounted on
Totally.
street lamps, street lights. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It makes one wonder, given the kind of restraints that I put on vampires in this book, what kind of world they have these days. You know what I mean? Because it was pretty easy to skate by 50 years ago as far as like surveillance stuff and forensics and all that stuff. But like it's a different world now, you know?
Hmm. Well, as we've been speaking about with the Vietnam War, Dwayne carries the weight of war, grief, and addiction. So, what made him the right character to anchor this novel?
I mean, I don't think it's anything as like intentional as that. Like I don't work with that intentionality really of like specificity. I think I just start writing and it sounds goofy to be like the characters inform me, but a lot of ways the characters inform me, you know.
Uh-huh.
And my entire shtick as a writer, I think, is to convince you that these characters are at least mostly believable, you know. And if I do that, then like I could throw a Nazi werewolf into it if I wanted to, because it's like the plot doesn't matter if the characters are believable and flawed and human, then most readers are along for the ride, you know. So he's just a flawed, effed up guy, you know, and that kind of happened organically.
Yeah, I think I say the last few authors, maybe it's the last 20 authors, we've all been kind of swimming in characters that exist in the morally gray.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think like I mean I don't know, for me specifically, it's kind of boring to read about a purely altruistic character and there's no internal conflict there. You know what I mean? Everything is very smooth, and I like that kind of questionable. I think we do a great disservice to ourselves to be like, this character was just likable. Like, who gives a shit? That's great. Right on.
Yeah, you don't want to get light switch brain when you're reading
Yeah,
fiction.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, even down to a child, somewhat an adolescent. Julia was how old again?
13.
13. So,
Yeah.
yeah, adolescent. Julia isn't just a victim in the story, she becomes a driving force in the violence and the revenge. So, what does giving her that kind of agency add to the novel?
Again, I think it's just like you can't. I struggle as a writer with like letting things happen to my characters, and so I'm continually trying to come back to the story, because that's like if they're just passive and stuff happens to them, it's not as exciting as if they're forwarding the plot themselves, you know. And so she was, and just given the history of her life and everything, like she is really out for blood, you know. And I like that idea of like kind of turning tropes on their head a little bit, you know, and making her the kind of instigator of all this entire revenge story, you know. So it's a way of flipping things on its head, and most of all, man, you got to keep yourself entertained as a writer, you know.
Yeah, and kind of following the pattern of the morally gray, not allowing things to just passively happen to characters. As far as revenge is concerned, a lot of books, revenge often gets framed as catharsis, but in Coffin Moon, it feels poisonous.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah, there's no good guy in this book. There's no like justified. Nothing is justified. It's all aggrieved and terrible, and yeah, like you said, poisonous. It's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, well, I don't want to get into spoiler territory, so maybe I'll just
It's
move
tough.
on.
I know it's tough.
Maybe I'll pick your brain after we stop recording.
Yeah, totally.
Well, Varley feels like more than just an antagonist. He seems to embody a hunger that never ends. What idea were you exploring through him?
Again, it's just that like with the vampire trope that I find so goofy is the like the sexy, like well-heeled, rich vampire when it's like they have all, yes, they have eternal life, absolutely. They also have so many limitations set against them that like vampirism would not be a fucking treat. You know what I mean? It is a curse. And it's like there's nothing like gothic and castly about it, I think, at least in our current system, you know, because like if you and I stay out past our bedtime, we don't perish, you know? And the whole notion of vampirism is built on murder, and it's built on devouring blood of people you have murdered. And so there are very few people, I think, that could handle that for any amount of time, that could do that morally or emotionally or whatever. And those who do have a proclivity for that kind of life. And you got to be a sociopath, I think, to survive as a vampire in any amount of time, you know? And so that's what, like, Varley's one of the few that has managed to survive because he's like, oh, yeah, these crazy parameters of where I have to kill to live, like, I can do that. Actually, I kind of like it.
Yeah. I tell you some of the weird, goofy thoughts that go through my head sometimes when it comes to vampires. As you mentioned, they're romanticized, and
Yeah.
they basically survive off murder. So it's blood, right? And I guess it depends on the story as to whether they actually eat food. But if they're totally subsisting on blood, you've got plasma, which is fluid, but then you've got protein. Do they urinate and defecate?
Yeah.
because because the funniest idea I can think of in my head is to see some really violent supernatural being just accidentally walk in the bathroom and see them sitting on the toilet.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. No, it's such a trip. You got to consider the like logistics of all of that stuff, you know?
Mhm. Well, do you see violence born from grief as erasing our humanity or revealing our darker side of it?
Oh my God, that is a very cerebral question.
You want me to go back to the defecation and urination?
Yeah, right. Talk about vampire fest some more. Yes, I mean, ultimately, that's what this whole thing is based upon is that I think becoming inured to violence, we do lose a part of ourselves, and especially repeatedly, you know, and especially if it's built upon the like notion of staying alive or not, you know. Yeah, it gets dark real fast, you know. And so exploring that, and Dwayne really fights that the entire length of the book due to his experiences in Vietnam. He doesn't want to go back to being that kind of person that he was, but Julia, in this hunt for revenge that she has, is kind of asking him to, and it at times it requires it. So he's in a real dark place through most of the book, you know.
Yeah. Well, the Pacific Northwest, as a lot of settings, almost become its own presence or own character in the book. So, how do you see the landscape shaping the story's atmosphere?
You know, honestly, man, every book of mine is set either in like Portland or like fictionalized coastal towns in Oregon, or maybe like this one partially like North Dakota or Los Angeles, and it's like it's mostly Oregon. Like almost every single book of mine is set in Oregon to some degree, and it's like I just can't bullshit my way through like a book in set in Boston. I don't know it. You know what I mean? And so it's really just a question of me like I know this place, I know the nooks and crannies, and I know the people, and so it's a question of like, I'm trying to convince you as a reader. And so I feel like I couldn't do that as well if I set it in some place that I didn't know, you know? There's a place like Wilderland in Road 7, my novel Road 7, which is an island off the coast of Iceland. Shit's totally made up. You know what I mean? So that entire island and a lot of its regional like culture and stuff is purely invented. And so some of that stuff you can make up, but for the most part, like I just got to write what I know.
Do you think it's possible to do that effectively if you've never been there and don't have a feel for it? Because I've always...
Oh yeah. Other writers can. I just don't feel comfortable with it. But yeah, you do your research. You know what I mean? There's this great satirical writer named George Singleton, and he's so funny. And he wrote a short story about these two fly fishermen who were like, I think they were vying for the same woman in a relationship, and so there was this fierce competition. And so much of the book is about like particular like flies and fly fishing. And he gets down to the granular shit about it, And when he got interviewed about it, he's like, "Oh, I just researched enough to bullshit my way through it. 99% of it is forgotten, And so that's how I am with research. And so I'm fully convinced that there are other writers that could do a smashing job setting a novel in Boston without ever being there or wherever.
Yeah, I wonder. It's like some of the like Hemingway, for instance, has been all over the place.
Yeah.
The eternal explorer. I wonder, somebody that lives in Boston, if somebody completely fabricated, did research obviously, but had never been to Boston, do you think they could pull it off to where somebody that was from Boston read it would just be dumbfounded, like, oh my God, it was like you've been there?
Yeah, there was a cool thing in my short story collection, Folk Songs for Trauma Surgeons. There is a story about a guy who works in a slaughterhouse. And I had done a bunch of research on slaughterhouses and the way the stun guns work and how many animals come down the line and what the chutes look like and all that. And actually got an email from a dude who works at a slaughterhouse who's like, "I thought you were a brother of mine," So like, I did the work.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it's totally possible.
Okay. The stun gun. Now I've got Anton Chigurh in my head.
Yeah, right.
Just standing there at the end, just looking at these cows with this dead-eyed stare.
Yeah.
Well, early readers have called the book, quote, Stephen King meets Tarantino. What do you make of that comparison?
I'll take it. I mean, they're both super entertaining. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think this book in particular is a slower burn than my previous two, particularly Fever House. This is a lot more, takes a while to get going and get all the plot pieces in place, while Fever House was just like going from the beginning, But I'll take it. They're both like, again, formative, like putting out formative media from when I was younger. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see it having kind of like, what do you call it? From Dusk Till Dawn. It starts off as something just very like, like your book is kind of like a noir story, but then there's this one thing that really throws you off.
Yeah.
And then just like From Dusk Till Dawn, it's like two guys trying to evade the police and they finally make it over the border. They're free. And then what the hell is happening now?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's two ways to write a vampire book, and it's like that, or it's like vampires on page one,
Mm-hmm.
And the first draft of Coffin Moon, Dwayne Miner is, and I'll try to not lay any spoilers out here either, but he's in the bathroom of this dive bar in North Dakota, and he's got like 3 silver bullets in this gun, and he's going to confront one of the guys that slaughtered his family. So it's like what turns out to be somewhat of a later point in the book was the beginning in the first draft. And my editor, who I've worked with on 4 books now at Random House, was just like, it's not working. And like Julia in the first draft, like they didn't actually know each other. They met like later on in the story. So one of the things about being a writer is learning to take advice that works and discarding the rest. And I'm very fortunate because my editor she is just so good at seeing what works and what doesn't. So yeah, it's a lot different. But it was much more of a vampire immediately thing in the first book, in the first draft.
When it comes to you and your editor, kind of just like a side note that you mentioned that, are there any particular darlings you have to kill? Kind of
That's the cool thing.
recurring darlings?
Dude, when I first started with Fever House, that was the first book she edited. I was, I had done 4 books on a small press, but I was like, oh, I'm in the big time now. I got to do everything that she says. And after I turned in the edits, she was like, no, if you did like 30%, that would be great. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. So I get to be a lot more judicious about like what I take and what I don't take as far as her suggestions go, but she's right so often. You know what I mean? And it's like, I knew that reading it, I knew that was the right decision to make, and reading that. And, so she works her ass off at this stuff, and it improves the books every time.
Well, Dwayne's time in Vietnam never really ends for him. How does that war ripple into the supernatural conflict of the novel?
I'm not sure. I think it's just like we talked about earlier. He is so scarred that it leads him to make decisions after he comes back that kind of reverberate throughout the rest of the book. And again, I'm not trying to lay spoilers down, but and it just informs him of like, he is petrified of drinking again. He is petrified of becoming the kind of like quick to anger, violent dude that he has been in the past. And so it's really just these like shackles that he's carrying around while trying to be a parent to this traumatized child, and then ultimately still trying to be some kind of like guiding force as they do this insane thing of trying to hunt this vampire down. So Vietnam, he's like, it's one of the formative events of his life.
Was there anything, and I know I'm probably reading into things as I am wont to do, but
That's right on.
Was there anything about the fragility of his emotional state that Varley was able to exploit, that somebody that wasn't dealing with that, because vampires usually have that ability to kind of mind control you in a sense?
Yeah, my vampires don't have that. They are as smart or as dumb as they were in life, And Varley is a guy who has gotten more crafty over the interceding time that he's been a vampire, but he's still as prone to his own emotions, like he has not grown as a person in the interceding time that he's been a vampire. And so there was nothing to like, he's as much of at the mercy of his emotions as Varley is. So it's these two like, like brittle dudes wrecking each other's lives.
Well, something I will say about Varley, which there's a lot of talk about how Varley, throughout however, what is it, like over 100 years he's been alive?
Yeah, about 100 years.
Yeah, over all of the time that he's been alive, his emotions, his temper has gotten him in trouble. But it's also on the other side of the coin, he can be extremely patient. Like there are times where he's in an environment where there's no police around. He could have just destroyed everybody in the room, but he didn't. It's like he was like,
yeah. And again, I don't think it's like, he's not like masterful at it. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't always F everybody up that I meet. Very often he does, but yeah. So like the whole book, to me, it's just like being a vampire would be so joyless and crappy, And so he has not grown from it.
well, as far as growth or lack thereof, vampires are loaded with centuries of symbolism. Was there anything you felt that was left unsaid that you wanted to bring forward in Coffin Moon with regard to vampires and vampire lore?
To me, it's like mostly it's this idea of fatherhood, and fatherhood is such a like intense theme throughout the book with Dwayne and Julia's relationship, but also Varley and his old man, who like gets very brief coverage, but like Varley is booted from his house at a very young age, and then he has the kind of creature that made him, and the kind of putting that person on a pedestal and then having that ultimately smashed, and broken apart. So that is really an underrunning theme throughout the book. But as far as like specific vampire lore, like some of it like I liked, and some of it was just too goofy for me, or too much of a hindrance. And so I like the ability. Cool thing about vampires is you can take what you want and leave the rest,
Mhm. Yeah, and as far as the pulp and grit of the 70s culture that you kind of infused into it, were there any particular books, films, artifacts that kind of helped shape that mood?
I mean, I hope they don't sue me, because I think Richard Lang's Rovers and Andy Davidson's In the Valley of the Sun are the two best vampire novels we have. And it was very hard to not just brazenly rip those dudes off, because those are such fantastic novels.
Well, much of Coffin Moon takes place on the road, moving from alleys to highways to snowfields. What does that constant sense of movement add to the story?
Again, I think that it was more of a plot device, in the sense that it's like it's a hunt. And so that's just one of the, pardon the pun, vehicles I know well enough for a chase, and this is a chase novel ultimately. And so if they had been in Portland, it would have gotten a lot trickier, as far as like just keeping things moving. So yeah, it just kind of happened organically. And really, I only got like 2 or 3 tricks up my sleeve, and like the whole chase novel is one of them. Smoke City was a road novel, and in its way, Road 7 was as well. So it's just one of the tools I got.
Gotcha. Well, I don't know if this is possible without creating a spoiler, but so feel free to pass. But at its core, do you think Coffin Moon leaves space for healing, or does it insist that some wounds never close?
Uh, I mean, I don't know if that's my place to say, because like you were talking about earlier, kind of interpreting events from the book certain ways. Like I think every reader should take their own meaning and value from it, And I have my opinion about it, but I think that's the thing. Like one of the things that I love is leaving endings kind of nebulous and uncertain, and there's a little bit of that in this book, and it's very intentional, So I want readers to be able to draw their own meaning and their own like future for these characters. Paul Tremblay does that a lot with his books, and it drives me absolutely batshit. And I also love it so much, that kind of like uncertainty of his ending. So yeah, I don't know. That's a question for the reader, I think.
Yeah. I've always thought it would be good for some authors to end books with plot resolutions or lack thereof that kind of read like koans. Are
Yeah,
you from?
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just make you think until you just reach enlightenment.
yeah, totally. There you go.
Well, you have described your work as passing through a quote literary colander.
Yeah,
Uh, what
yeah,
does that
right.
really mean when you're shaping a story?
I think it means that, as I've mentioned on other podcasts, man, I grew up, of course, reading Stephen King and comic books and stuff. But as a formative writer, kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, I read so much literary fiction, and I loved it. And I loved the character development, and I loved the language. Like, I think that the language in books is like so important, which sounds very dorky to say, but like the actual prose is so important. And so I wanted to be a literary writer, you know? And like if I could write about a guy, trying to find himself, with beautiful, language and a lot of character navel gazing. Like I would, but I can't because I grew up on Stephen King and X-Men comics, and I love that shit so much that I have to put, like I said, a werewolf ninja in it or something, some kind of fantastic genre-like thing, you know. So if I toe that line between what I feel is like pretty close to literary fiction, but also cool genre-based ideas, and I know literary fiction is another genre, but just for this argument's sake, other genre-based ideas in it to keep myself entertained, then I've hit pay dirt. So it's like horror or crime, but with a literary kind of bent to it.
And forgive me for splitting hairs here, but I'm thinking like literary fiction is literary fiction by itself, or would you refer to as something like Southern Gothic as literary
Yeah,
fiction?
absolutely. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And again, I think it's all like, there's a lot of people who like literary fiction is the serious older brother amongst the group. And then horror and crime and all that shit are like the ones running around whipping each other with towels and unserious. And I don't think that's true at all. But that kind of serious stuff was what I learned that I wanted to write stuff like that, but I just can't, you know, because I have to put the weird shit in there too.
Did you read, with regard to literary fiction, did you read some of the darker stuff like Faulkner and?
No, I mean, I did in school, but it was all like contemporary stuff. And it's just like, being desperately poor in my 20s and either going to Goodwill where you could, at the time get books for 99 cents or the library and just like armloads of them. And yeah, just reading voraciously.
Yeah, and as you're kind of speaking about, starting off with this kind of generalized, cohesive atmosphere as far as a trope or a genre goes, but then you insert what werewolf ninja? Is that what you said?
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
So your novels kind of resist being fitted into one genre. What sparks that kind of hybrid energy at the beginning of a project? Anything in particular? Do you have a thought? Do you?
They
I
get
mean,
harder.
obviously you have a thought, but you know what I
Right.
mean.
No, like what's the impetus from? They get harder every time. Like this one that I'm working on now. I actually started writing a novel and I was very excited about it. And I told my editor about it, told my agent about it. And I was about maybe 15,000 words into it. And my editor was like, check this out. And it was a publisher's marketplace announcement that had 99% of the same plot as my book. And so I was like, oh man, beat me to the punch. Okay. Because obviously this person had already started it and it was coming out and everything. So I had to start from scratch and it was real hard to start this new one because, my whole shtick is like taking a trope, zombies in Fever House, unicorns in Road 7, vampires in Coffin Moon, all that, and like just kind of flipping it on its head and doing my own thing with it. And like there's only so many tropes.
Yeah.
So it gets harder. But every one of them, I think for Coffin Moon, it was the notion of that guy of Dwayne Miner sitting in a bathroom while like honky tonk music is coming in under the door and he's just sitting there holding this revolver in his hand in this bathroom stall, ready to go strong arm his way to this vampire that killed everybody that he loved. So you just get these little kernels, and then you just start unwrapping that and writing more and more. And if I'm writing really well, everything reveals itself. So I'll finish a chapter and be like, okay, I know what happens next. If I get stuck, it means I screwed up somewhere and I have to go back.
Gotcha. Well, you've been publishing zines since the 90s. What from that DIY world still lives in your novels today?
I mean, Fever House had like a lot of punk stuff. A lot of books. What I'll do is I'll just pick like 5 or 6 things that I want to write about, and then just shoehorn them all together and stitch them up and make them work. And so with Fever House, I really want to talk about the 90s, punk explosion and everything, and the major label feeding frenzy that kind of followed. But I think the biggest thing, and it's nothing that actually goes into the books, but it's a thing that has informed me as a writer since I started doing zines. And it's just that notion of like absolute ceaselessness, of like just doing shit and doing it and doing it and doing it. Because in publishing, you get told no so many times, just again and again and again. Whether it's from finding an agent or shopping your manuscript around to this to that. And zines and DIY punk like taught me that kind of like just fierce do it and do it and do it and do it, and I think it served me really well because I put out 4 books on a small press before I got the deal with Random House, so it's like it's just a thing that I love doing, but you get told no a lot.
Yeah, I missed that, I'm assuming you came of age in the 90s, like teenage years, I imagine, or
uh Early, yeah, like teenager, and then in my 20s. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, 92, 12, 93, 13, and so on. And I really loved, like, people publishing zines, and the underground music was really big, and they had stores that sold like the underground unlabeled stuff. I think they did it on consignment and stuff like that. And it wasn't like it was struggling to survive. It was flooded with people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so, just kind of going off into the weeds briefly, I know they were considered from Nevermind onward like alternative grunge, but would you consider Nirvana's album Bleach to be punk?
Sure,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think it's like, and I also think that running the risk of like that whole what's punk and what isn't argument could, like, that was a very important thing in the 90s, because it was
Uh-huh.
like a lot of our subculture was kind of being like devoured by major labels, and it felt like very life or death at the time. It does not feel that way now, and I would go so far as to say like there is some shit that isn't punk, like people trying to make the argument that conservatism is now punk can like give me a fucking break with that. But beyond, things like that, like my definition of punk is pretty broad. Like I think Black Boys on Mopeds by Sinead O'Connor is probably my top 5 favorite punk songs ever. And like you'd be hard pressed to call that sonically a punk song, you know? But lyrically and emotionally, like it's devastating.
Yeah. You said sonically. I'm starting to think of Sonic Youth now.
Oh, there you go.
Well, again, maybe it's just kind of tied to what you've explained already about the just the way the story unfolds. But when you write, do you discover meaning in the process, or do you believe the meaning is already buried in the story from the start?
I don't know what the hell I'm doing in the first draft. I have no clue. And it is like a lot of trusting your gut, and it's magic because more and more starts to be revealed, and it's like, oh, I'm just now like starting to realize like why one of the main characters is doing what they're doing, you know? I did not know why at first. And so it's a really magical process. And usually at the end of the first draft, I have a sense of relief that, oh, it's done. And I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going as far as themes and intention and meaning. And then I really get to fatten that up and add scaffolding to it in the second draft. And then beyond that, the next friggin' 8 edits that I do on it is really just a question of fine tuning that stuff. So it's usually for me the second draft where I'm able to kind of peel that away and find the real meaning and heavy intentions behind it. But I'm just walking in the dark that first draft, hitting my head on the ceiling. It is the unraveling of the creative act, and the kind of unspooling of it, and the figuring out, kind of trusting in the process. And I feel like every book is tackling a different thing, and so I'm just now starting to see through the vines what this one is about.
Well, if it'll produce spoilers, maybe not this book, maybe a previous book, but when you look back at an early draft, what usually surprises you about what stays and what gets stripped away?
I think once I'm done with the story, I get to take more risks. And I realize, oh, this is kind of trundling along and it's not, like my editor says, it's just not working. And so once I know the story, at least have a first draft down, I can like crack it apart and scatter the pieces everywhere and restructure it, or just get more inventive with it and more nutty, and put the reader through more anguish, as far as like what these characters have to go through. I think in the first draft, it's often like can be a little too pedestrian, because I'm just trying to like find my way, like I said. But once I finish, then I'm gonna be like, oh, I can put the character through this and still get to the same spot. Or they did not point A at the beginning of the book to point Z at the end. They did not. It's kind of flat, so we need to alter their interior landscape a little bit more, and that usually means fucking them up a little bit more. And so that's generally what happens in the second draft. I'm got from point A to point Z, and now I need to do it in a more terrible way.
Uh-huh. Well, I've never really looked into it enough to understand the term, but you are legally blind, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you kind of, for me and anybody else, kind of explain exactly what that entails?
Yeah, there's degrees of blindness. So there are very few people who are like totally blind. It's a varying disability. And so I fit the parameters of legal blindness, just because of the most people have roughly 180 degrees peripheral vision, and I was born with optic nerve hypoplasia, which is like a stunted development of the optic nerve, and so I have about 20 degrees peripheral vision. So it's just really severe tunnel vision, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have to augment the way you write in any way?
No, that's what I love about it. I'm actually I grew up in a kind of crazy house as a child, and I didn't know I was legally blind until I was 10. And by that time, I was pretty well enmeshed in art, like making art and drawing. And so kudos to my mom, who, once she discovered the depths of this disability, was never like, oh, you can't do that. So I, for a long time, was like an illustrator and graphic designer for bands and made a lot of art. I was a painter and all kinds of stuff. And ultimately, the thing that burned me out was all of the accoutrements that you need to be a visual artist, whether it's your equipment or a scanner and all these applications and everything. And then doing it for a living is especially hard because you have to hunt people down, for like $200. And then when you do, like, they inevitably want more, like, if you do a shirt for $200, somebody's like, can you actually send this to us in 3 colors and move this guy here? And it's just an endless creep. And so the thing that I love about writing is that innate simplicity of just me and a screen. So it's less a hindrance and more a gift.
Gotcha. Now, is any of your artwork on any of your social media, like your Instagram page or anything?
Yeah, I had a website that featured like writing and art pretty 50-50. But if you look like on Discogs, the record cataloging site, like you can look up all the record covers that I've done, and you just Google my name, a bunch of them come up. And I did the first 4 covers of my own books. So the ones that were on Meerkat Press, I did those covers. So the stuff's around.
Well, from what I have read, family shows up a lot in your books. Why do you think it keeps pulling you back?
When my partner and I became foster parents about 3 weeks before COVID hit, and then we later got guardianship of the kids, and COVID was insanely hard for everybody. But it was like we had got these two highly traumatized little kids, lived in a tiny house. Suddenly we were quarantined and couldn't leave. So they didn't trust us and they didn't know who we were. And then they couldn't go to their preschool anymore. And I had like frozen shoulder, which is this weird, like, cartilage tendon thing where like I couldn't lift my arm higher than this without it like being in agony. And it was just a kind of like beautiful but nightmarish time, of like trying to raise these children with like this really painful physical limitation and just this psychic weight of like being the caregivers of these kids during COVID, where we were all, kind of ensconced inside. And as somebody who grew up with my own traumas and terrors and difficulties, it's like it's just one of those big fears of like, oh yeah, like I don't want to f these kids up. So I think parenthood, since I got these guys, is like it's going to be a thing that comes up in all my books because it is the thing that weighs on me the most as a human. Is like being a good parent. It might come out in like fucked up ways, you know what I mean? Like I would not say that Dwayne is a good parent, but the feelings that he's had are like, oh, I've felt those before. You know what I mean? That kind of like panic and that sense of drowning and all that. So in a way it's an exhumation of fear. And it's a way of like putting that fear or that shortcoming onto the page, either as a way of like, I think there's power in just documenting something. And also like, this is the type of person that again, just kind of organically came about, but it's, some of it's his and some of it's like, oh yeah, very real human feelings I felt.
Gotcha. Well, we've been talking about how your stories kind of blur the line between the ordinary and the uncanny. Is there anything in particular that draws you to that borderland?
Oh, I think it's so fun. That moment of like, with like magical realism or whatever, like where there's either magical realism where the fantastic is just mundane and everyday and run of the mill, or in crime and horror where it's so cool where they're very similar genres in the sense that it's very much about elongating and living in that moment right after the known world disappears. So it's all about you've seen the monster, but he hasn't latched onto your arm yet. The bullet has someone's pulled a gun, but the bullet hasn't hit you yet. That moment is like, oh my, it's just delicious. And if I could elongate that uncertainty and that weirdness for as long as I can, and then keep stepping it up, it's just so fun. Where it's just like that, and then that steps of weirdness, like keeping, those steps and the stakes a little bit higher each time. But yeah, before everything gets fully revealed, it's just such a fun sense I love reading that stuff and I love writing that stuff.
Yeah. Well, looking across everything you've made, zines, novels, and art, what do you think is the thread that ties those all together?
Uh, just that like desire, that creative desire. I have been making since I was a little kid, and it's where I find so much of my joy. Like writing. Oh my god, dude, I love writing so much. Like there are writers where they like kind of they like having finished it, and they like the process, finishing the process. I love the process. There are very few times where I'm like, oh, I got to do this. Like I just love it so much. Maybe when I'm on the 15th edit of a book, then I'm like pretty burnt out, but the rest of the time, like I have the best job in the world.
Are you talking about I mean, I'm sure you enjoy both, but are you talking more about the wordsmithing Or the actual flow state you get into?
Everything.
Everything.
I love everything. I love the first draft writing where you're discovering and learning things. I love the editing where you have to clean it up. All of it. All the trappings. I love it all.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like sculpting.
Yeah, it really is. It's like the first draft is messy, and well, I've said it so many times, but the biggest gift I ever gave myself was giving myself permission to write a shitty first draft. Because a lot of people will get stuck on if it's not perfect or not, and then they never finish it. And so I give myself permission to just make a messy first draft, and then I go in and I build it. I cut this part here and I add this, but it never gets done if I don't finish that first draft.
Gotcha. Well, what is the life of Keith Rosson like outside of writing and creating art in general?
Oh man, I mean, a lot of dad stuff, and that's really it. Like between having a relationship and kids, and writing, like my days are pretty full, and so beyond that, it's just trying to get some form of exercise and hanging out with friends, But reading is still a huge hobby, but it's also like I have so many blurbs to do that like I don't always have time to read for fun. Like I'm kind of reading stuff that I've promised to blurb. But I'm very fortunate because writing is like a job, but it's also like my go-to enjoyment,
Do your kids have any writing or artistic aspirations?
One kid she's much more physical and into like, sport things. And then another kid is super creative and makes insane art. Like she's insanely good. And they both really want to read my stuff, but they're still a little too young, So one of these days, in a couple of years, I imagine they'll like start cracking them open. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Right. Sounds great. Well, Keith, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
I so appreciate it, Vincent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, or let your readers know about?
I mean, we're talking about Coffin Moon, so if everybody who's listening could buy a copy and then order it for 15 of their friends, I would so appreciate it. But yeah, just, I think like stuff like this is so awesome, and you guys deserve a lot of like accolades and kudos for it, because a lot of times it can be pretty thankless, and you're really doing a service to the reader community and the horror community by doing stuff like this. So just thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And readers, definitely review the book, but don't spoil it.
Yeah, right. Totally. Yeah.
All right. Sounds great. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Keith, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.